Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 1973 James Bond spy thriller titled Live and Let Die. Now, Live and Let Die runs for 2 hours and 1 minute long. It is directed by Guy Hamilton. It is produced by frequent collaborators of the James Bond franchise, especially at that time being Harry Saltzman and Albert Broccoli. The script was done by Tom Mankiewicz based on the novel Live and Let Die as part of the James Bond entries. This was done by Sir Ian Fleming, who wrote the novel. The score was done by Guy Martin. Did I say Guy Martin? George Martin. God rest his soul. Which, of course, comes at no surprise since the theme song to Live and Let Die is by Paul McCartney and Wings. The cinematography was done by Ted Moore. The editing was done by Bert Bates, Raymond Poulton, and John Shirley. And the stars of the movie are Roger Moore in his debut as 007. He replaced Sean Connery after Sean Connery decided he wasn't going to do another James Bond movie after Diamonds Are Forever. But unfortunately, in 1983, he actually did come back to do another James Bond movie called Never Say Never Again, but it was not actually an official entry in the James Bond franchise. But uh, but but at least from 1973 to 1985, Roger Moore stepped up to play the role as 007. Their cast members include Yaphet Kotto, Jane Seymour, Julius Harris, David Hedison, Gloria Hendry, Clifton James, Geoffrey Holder, and of course, regular members of the James Bond franchise included Bernard Lee as M, Lois Maxwell as Miss Moneypenny. Unfortunately, Desmond Llewellyn, who played the role as Q, was not present in this movie, although he was mentioned by name, and he actually invented another new gadget for James Bond to use to his advantage. This time, the invention was actually a wristwatch, but not just an ordinary wristwatch. If you turn it around and it materializes into like a red coloring, it actually can also serve as a magnet, which is something that could be used for James Bond whenever he's in trouble. So although it is a little disappointing that Q was not in the movie, but it was good to know that he was actually there by name. What did I think of this movie, Live and Let Die? For a debut for Roger Moore, I thought it was overall very impressive. I think Roger Moore was kind of like taking the James Bond franchise to another newer level than as opposed to Sean Connery and George Lazenby by making the movies, the Bond movies, a little more campier, but more comedic, lighthearted, and instead of him actually more like putting confronting danger, he always seems to find ways to escape from danger. It's like the guy has more lives than Houdini. And most of his movies seem to focus mostly on him just escaping from danger, and then eventually, uh, maybe around near the end, he always seems to find ways to outsmart his villains rather than use more physical aggression. But then again, I don't think the James Bond movies were really always about uh, physical confrontations, more like a lot of escaping, more like trying to put yourself into a perilous situation where it seems virtually impossible to escape from, but somehow, due to quick thinking, he always seems to manage to break free. And to that, I've always liked that about James Bond. Sure, I know sometimes he has to carry a gun, but then again, what do you expect? The guy works for Secret Service, so carrying a gun is a requirement, or in Latin, it's pronounced sinaquanon, which means can't live without. So when it comes to theme songs in a James Bond movie, no one ever comes close to that than rock legend Paul McCartney and his band Wings. I think honorable mention would probably be like Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger gets honorable mention, and then I guess third place I would choose Tina Turner's Goldeneye. That is also another brilliant James Bond theme song. The rest of the other ones, to me, I've always thought were kind of cheesy and campy, but at least these ones were really, really on the mark. And I could actually hum to the song "Live and Let Die" because it's such a simple song. It's got that feeling of adventure, that James Bondish type of feel, especially the backgrounds. I mean, let's face it, Paul McCartney is a musical genius, always has been, always will. And this is the theme song itself is what really carries this movie through. Many people might think that this song is annoying because what do you expect? It's Paul McCartney. But to me, I find that to be simply wonderful. It may not be fabulous, but it is very good, yeah. Okay, this is definitely another milestone about Live and Let Die is that um this was different from a lot of the James Bond movies, being that it was, although the debut of Roger Moore, I also thought it was probably the weirdest James Bond movie. And weird doesn't necessarily mean bad, but it also, I'm not saying that this movie is not perfect, no. But, in the sense of weirdness, this was definitely the one that tops them all. If you want to think about the weirdest James Bond movie, this one takes the cake. Because not only is James Bond running away from danger, taking down villains, and escaping from one perilous situation to another, he's also dealing with witchcraft, voodoo, tarot cards, dry martinis, shaken and stirred. Well, he does that with all the movies. But, this was a pretty strange movie. And the bad guys in this movie are some of the creepiest. I mean, some of the bad guys there include some guy who looks like WWE wrestler Papa Shango. He's got he wears this white top hat. He laughs a lot. He's got the face paint. He seems to somewhat deal with handling prop snakes, which have their mouths open all the time, ready to suck the venom into a poor helpless soul. And let's see, there's also some weird guy who seems to laugh a lot, who wears this kind of like metallic arm, uh, which I actually thought was pretty cool to be honest with you. I remember James Bond takes as a gun. He pulls it out of his pocket, and then this guy with the metallic arm, he 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 twists the gun like a pretzel. I mean, that was fucking amazing, man. I actually I actually hate to say this, but I actually sat back and laughed. I mean, actually, the villains were actually pretty colorful, and even though I guess the weakness to this movie is that there's a lot of black exploitation in this movie, and this is kind of where I have to sort of tee back on the weakness. I'm not saying that it's weak because there are a lot of black people in this film than the other 23 installments in this series, but it just seems quite upsetting that Mr. Bond, Roger Moore's debut, was labeled with reverse racial terms. He was nicknamed, Honky and Cracker. And you know what? That's racist on account of black people because they won't like it if they were called racist names such as the N word or any other thing. I'm not gonna say it because I was never raised that way. Okay, I have some relatives who are black, so I'm not going to use any kind of language. I can throw the fucks and the shits all I want, but racist terms is not permitted. So, it kind of feels I kind of feel kind of a little bad that he had to deal with being called those names, and that's just not right, no matter what. Especially in this movie, of course, as usual in every James Bond movie, James Bond is going city to city hopping. This time, he's taking more or less a North American tour, because the plot of the movie is that three secret agents have been killed on assignment. One of them in Harlem, New York. One of them in a rather weird situation where there was a funeral march on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. And then a secret agent is asking some guy right next to him, whose funeral is this? And then the guy next to him would say, why yours, sir? And so then this funeral march becomes, oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, and the saints go marching in. You know. And that was kind of weird. And then we got this hoodoo voodoo witchcraft that takes place on the island of Saint Monique or San Monique, where another agent dies from being venomized by a poisonous snake. So now it's James Bond is up to his deed is to track down and ascertain who the culprits are behind these evil schemes and to put them out of their misery once and for all. But like I said, the whole back to the racist thing, it seems strange that he would be ostracized that way. But I guess, the world was kind of different in the 1970s compared to our more image conscious ways of our modern times. I mean, it does lack a lot of political correctness here. And I know it won't sit well for the more sensitive viewership, unfortunately. The ideology might have been the results of, African Americans coming out on their own in the movie industry, and at a time, and they were trying to be treated like more serious performers in the movies and avoiding and usurping any cliches that they have fallen victim to over the years. But their use of racist words towards Caucasians just seems to be badly cliched on account of their lingo. And that kind of was a little bit cringeworthy. Roger Moore debuts as Sean Connery's replacement as the dashing assassin 007, in which he would continue for at least 7 more installments, ending with A View to a Kill. Now, granted, Moore may lack the charisma that Sean Connery possessed in his 6 outings as Bond, but he still manages to play the part better than most of his successors, especially, Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig. I never quite dug Daniel Craig too much. He hasn't really convinced me. Maybe he stepped up a little bit in the movie Spectre, but I've seen Casino Royale and that was dull. Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, no. But I do still think that Roger Moore was pretty much. I think of him as being the second best James Bond. Yeah, I would put him at number two. Sure, he had the potential to be at the same level as Connery, if only he weren't trying too hard to be a carbon copy of Adam West in the campy Batman series of the 60s, because I think he was kind of channeling in that way. I mean, they may as well just throw in the onomatopoeias for his scenes or the cartoony sound effects, because at times a lot of his movies seem to fall into that category of being more cartoony than realistic, which is not bad. I mean, it's fun, but it's not really much to be taken seriously. The plot juxtaposes between a deviant drug lord along with the mystifying voodoo as the locations take us from Harlem to New Orleans to San Monique. And the main bad guy in this movie, who James Bond is after, is a guy who lives, I guess you could say, a double name. He, some ways, he is Dr. Kananga, um, also known, or sometimes he also goes by the moniker Mr. Big, played by Yaphet Kotto, who has been quite pivotal in the 1970s blaxploitation movies. Sadly, I know. I mean, the guy was a very convincing villain. I mean, he's pretty much up there with some of the other great villains in the Bonds franchises. Um, he's pretty much up there with Ernest Stavro Blofeld, and then you had um, Mr. Scaramanga, Francisco Scaramanga, and yeah, there was some. Who could ever forget Jaws? The guy who had like the shark teeth. There are some. I mean, he's pretty much up there among like some of the best villains in this movie. He was this cool, slick guy who seems to play along with obsessed with tarot cards and having his fortune read and predicting. He takes his tarot card reading very, very seriously and very, very personally. Um, he kind of could pass off pretty much almost like a Batman villain in his own way. And then, of course, he has, of course, his wild and wacky henchmen, including a guy who handled snakes and voodooism. And of course, my personal favorite one is the guy who has like the arm that's made out of metal. That was he was pretty cool to watch. There was a lot of cool scenarios in this movie, and I'm not putting that down in any way, shape, or form. It was fun to watch. It really was. I wasn't bored. This was some pretty fun James Bond movie. For the Bond girl, we have Jane Seymour. Of course, the only time I remember Jane Seymour was when she was in that period piece TV series drama, Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Excuse me, Jane Seymour. She was pretty young at the time. I think she was only like about maybe 21 years old. But man, she is beautiful. She was just as beautiful then as she is now. Here she plays the role as Solitaire. She's the tarot card reader, and she becomes not the only Bond girl in this movie. She becomes like the Bond girl like around the later hours. In the first hours, James Bond actually, his first, I guess you could say, interracial relationship. Well, actually, in the beginning opening scenes, you find him in bed with another agent. This time she was an Italian. Yeah, I guess he was a little hungry, so he decided to go for a little Italian named Miss Caruso. And of course, when M and Moneypenny show up at the door, she's like hiding in the closet. So there were about three Bond girls in this one. The second one, he goes biracial. Yes, that's right, to show that James Bond doesn't only just go after Caucasian chicks. There, he is also was seen in bed with an African American who also seems to be a secret agent herself. Um, who unfortunately her weakness is that she scares easily, and I guess there's somewhat her vulnerability also eventually ends up getting her killed. So then he goes from her to uh, Solitaire. And I thought, for one of her earlier roles, Jane Seymour actually did pull off the role quite convincingly. She still kind of looked a little inexperienced and a little nervous on camera, but then again, I think it's kind of normal. I mean, she was just still breaking out into acting, so I'll go easy on her. So it's time for James Bond to stack her deck and get the opportunity to poke her. Get the tongue-in-cheek humor, huh? Yeah, why not? I'm on a roll. So she loses her powers once he draws the card of love, and so her and Bond eventually get into some kind of intercourse, which of course results in her losing her power to tell the future, because after she must lose her virginity to the Lothario assassin. You think she should have learned by now. We knew it was bound to happen. Now, let's face it, Live and Let Die is entertaining in two main factors. The first being that it plays out like a good old-fashioned, action-packed thriller. But the main downfall about Live and Let Die was the abominable boat chase between James Bond, the other Kananga's henchmen. But I think what really, really made this movie bad was the appearance of Clifton James. I thought he was the red herring in this movie. The bigoted sheriff who goes by the name of J.W. Pepper. God, I hated that character. That tobacco spitting, uncouth, redneck sheriff. I couldn't stand his accent. I couldn't stand the way he performed. He was like the worst performer in this movie. God, I fucking hated that guy. I could not stand. I couldn't stand the guy's accent, the way he was speaking. What you got there, boy? You couldn't stand with Mr. Sheriff J.W. Pepper. Secret agent? On what terms? I couldn't stand his voice. I really didn't like it. The boat chase could have been much better if that annoying J.W. Pepper wasn't put into the picture. It's kind of strange that, even though he had a convincing accent, Clifton James, who plays Sheriff J.W. Pepper, is actually from Spokane, Washington. So I guess the accent was convincing, but he was annoying, and I don't think he really was needed to be in that movie. And you know what the worst part was? He actually comes back in the sequel, The Man with the Golden Gun. Why? I didn't like him in Live and Let Die. Why should I want to see him again in The Man with the Golden Gun? Fortunately, I'm glad he didn't come back after that. Thank God. Pepper, I guess he was just brought in for some comic relief whose mission is to catch Bond and his pursuers. The other thing that kind of didn't sit well for me was, I guess, the outdated humor, which is sad because this Bond movie, I hate to say this, it didn't really quite age very well. And, the stereotypical cliched talking by the predominantly black cast, they were talking like they're a bunch of jive turkeys. And this whole thick sideburn black exploitated antagonist really brought the film down with the cliched. It really brought a bad image to them to be taken as serious performers, which I know they have potential to be very serious performers, but you couldn't really take them seriously with the way they were talking and the lingo that came about with them. I know I kind of sounded a little more over the top in this, but the thing is that I was really enthusiastic about this movie. Now I know I did a little bit of raving, and I know I did a little bit of ranting, and for a movie of its magnitude, it was not that bad of a movie. Just the stereotypes kind of brought me down, and J.W. Pepper's presence was also not really needed to be there. I mean, he wasn't brought in for comic relief. I thought he was an annoyance. And I don't know why he came back for the man with the golden gun. He wasn't needed. He was an he was an idiot, and he could have been done without. So, in spite of it all, if I was to give this movie a scale out of 10, I would give Live and Let Die a 7.5. So I guess this ends my rider review. Thank you all for listening in. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. If you want to leave a comment, go right ahead. Just remember, be kind, be courteous, and don't be rude. And I will be back again with another rider review. So until next time, this is Eric Carrot Rider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Bang!